In today's episode, I speak to Mike Acker, the power of story and the choices that you make. Mike begins the conversation by talking about his parents. His dad was a drug dealer and his mother was a witch. However, once they had children, they had completely turned their life around. It was the first radical choice that Mike knew about. We also discuss the good old days never really existed and how living in the fantasy of those times stops people from making good choices. Mike talks about the choices that we make and that you don't have to choose money or impact. Listen up to the rest of Mike's fascinating story and enjoy the insights that he shares. Before we begin our conversation, here is a quick shout out to the pathologically curious. Check out the Maverick Paradox magazine. It's a digital magazine written by Mavericks for business owners and professionals. You can find the magazine at themaverickparadox.com. The magazine's aim is to provoke maverick leadership everywhere. Welcome to the Maverick Paradox podcast, where we explore what it is to be a maverick and discover effective modes of leadership. I am Judith Germain, and my mission is to propel the maverick mindset into a world where character and integrity will ultimately have a higher premium than personality and bureaucracy. So thank you for joining me on this journey. If you would like to continue with me, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. And today our guest is Mike Acker. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Judith. Great to be here with you today.
Good to have you here. So tell the audience who you are.
Yes, my name is Mike Acker, and I am an executive and communication coach, best-selling author of Speak with No Fear, with nearly 500 reviews on Amazon, a couple of other books. And I love to help people realize their potential.
Wow. I love the way that you say it because you kind of step into it. And are you a public speaker too? Because I can imagine you saying this on stage.
Yeah, I do a lot of speaking. Sometimes right now I go out and I do a COVID test, fly somewhere, and then speak, and then come back and do a COVID test. So it's a weird world. And then other times I never leave my house because I have a home studio here with all kinds of cameras set up and angles. So sometimes I just do keynote presentations and workshops right from this office.
Okay, because the reason I asked this because when you said it with such power and poise. Yes. That's why I was like, oh yeah, public speaker.
Yes, 20 years. So if anybody's looking for a virtual keynote speaker around the world, I got it. I'm ready for you.
That's right. We can, because we can recognize our own, right?
That's right. That's right.
What I wanted to talk to you about is someone's story and the power and potential of choices. Because when I saw that, I thought, I'm intrigued. I need to know more.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've often heard it said to some variation that the choices that we make us. And really, my whole life is a product of that, as all of us, but not only the choices I've made, but also the choices my family has made. So I love to really start back with the story of my dad. My dad was a drug dealer and my mom was a witch. So if you just got done watching WandaVision, some of the things I saw in that, I'm thinking, hey, my mom talked about astral projection. My mom talked about some of those type of things. And my dad was a legit, real 5-yacht, 5-airplane, fly down to Central America, learn how to speak Spanish, cut out the middleman, bring it back, and distribute it.
Wow.
Unless you're a law enforcement agency, then I'm making all of it up. So that was my parents.
That's funny.
Yeah, that was my parents. And really, they at a young age, when my sister and I were at a young age, really were thinking through, what do we want to do for our kids? And so they looked at their life and looked at the adventure, the excitement, the money, the fun, the experience, and really thought we need to do something different for kids. Now that we're bringing kids into this world, there's got to be something different. My dad had a couple scares, and they just looked at it and thought this really wasn't sustainable. And that began a process of them going into, my mom got us involved in the Christian church, which she didn't even know anything about, into a preschool. My dad thought that was cute. And then he moved away from illegal drugs and moved into legal drugs, started selling coffee. And they made this radical change. And he made this radical change where they said, we're done with this life. And then they made this radical, very, for them, very unusual change from far out there, illegal activity, craziness, hippie movement to conservative Christian. And they made that choice right when I was around 4 or 5. Now, there was obviously some internal compelling aspects of it, but there was also a rational aspect to it of saying, what do we want for our kids? Now, they didn't get us involved in like a political Christian family. We instead were involved in very much like, hey, we see this in Jesus, let's go do it. So at a young age, my parents made the choice to take us to the streets of Seattle, to feed the homeless, to do soup kitchens. They made the choice to take us to nursing homes and visit those who no one else visited. They made the choice to take us to my sister to Haiti and to all of us to Mexico to see people who had a much less fortunate life. So we were able to see at a young age that what we had was not what the majority of people in the world had, that we had this middle income family. We were just middle America. And yet that was not what the world had. And so those choices at a young age that they made for us really impacted us. They got us involved in things in a different way. My sister now, I mean, she's been very fortunate to do very well in her life, and they're always looking for different ways that they can help people. And that's a lot because of what choices my parents made for us. So, and then for my own life, well, I am, my whole life has been, how can I serve because of what I've seen? How can I do that? So these choices kept on going. At the age of 10, my dad came home, and nobody should ever say this. Nobody should ever do this. But my dad came home, and at this point in time, he was working as an attorney, and we had a nice, comfortable life in America. And we were doing some great things, and we were serving in HIV in the 80s before people were doing that. We're doing soup kitchens, smuggled Bibles into China, all kinds of crazy stuff.
Wow, you guys are quite radical, isn't it? That's amazing.
Yeah, my parents really said, hey, if we're jumping in, and my dad's an all-in type person. I was all in on this whole hippie lifestyle. And now if I'm doing this, I'm all in with this aspect of giving to people and loving people and showing people. So he jumped all in. And so he comes home and he says, I quit my job. We're moving to Mexico. And I was 10 years old, and we moved to Mexico, and we served among the poor there. And now the whole issue that this came to affect me in is that I had already learned how to be successful in America, meaning I'd overcome some challenges on my own. As a young kid, I had a speech impediment, and I couldn't say "ja" and some other words. Soldier and shoulder sounded like the same word to me, and I couldn't pronounce difference. So I had finally overcome some speech impediment, finally had done well. And then they uproot me and moved me into a place where now I was thriving, and now I'm barely surviving. And I'm getting bullied, and kids are throwing rocks at me, walking the neighborhoods. And there's all kinds of craziness going on. And at this point in time, the choice that I made was to look back. And so often what we're doing when we're looking at our life and trying to forge a life ahead of us, instead of looking forward, we're looking backwards. And it's a huge temptation. We look back to when we last did things well. And for me, that was America. Here I was in Mexico and ardently holding on to things of the past. I was dressing like America. I was following American trends. I was wishing I was America. Some time passed, and I had a chance to go back and live in America and live with a family there for a few months in 8th grade. And all of a sudden, that rear view mirror that I was looking from back into wasn't as bright as it seemed to me. And when I realized that the reality I was looking back at wasn't the actual reality that I was thinking it was, I was able to move on past looking back and start looking forward. But it took me a moment to explore it. And I think a lot of people who are potentially listening to this right now, Judith, maybe they're in the spot where they're going, yeah, the choices that I make, they make me. But what about the choices that have been made for me? And that was my situation. These are choices that had been made for me. I was not in an age where I could choose where to live. But when I had a chance to realize my ideal situation, I realized it wasn't as ideal as I thought. And I went back and embraced it. So if you're in the spot where you're listening right now to Judith's podcast and you're thinking, yeah, how do I apply what Mike's talking about today? And you're just barely surviving. There's probably a chance that you're looking back right now. And I just encourage you to take a moment, pause, celebrate the past, mourn the past, grieve the past, get counseled for the past, whatever you do to not live there anymore. Take a breath and start charting out a future. And that's what I did. I came back to Mexico and I started making choices to get involved and really to embrace the culture, embrace the language, embrace everything. And by the time that then a couple of years later, where I had to make another choice, by the time I had that choice to move back to the United States, it was really hard because in so many ways, I was more Mexican than I was American. And I made a choice yet again to uproot, go back, and join my family who was moving back to the United States. And that began a whole nother series of choices. But I'll pause right there as I tell a little bit of the story and just say, what kind of questions am I bringing up in you, Judith, as I tell a little bit of my story?
Well, quite a bit, actually quite a bit. I did like the idea of hankering after an ideal situation which wasn't actually ideal in the first place. Mm-hmm. And it made me think about how so many people are hankering back to the good old days. Mm-hmm. But those, but if you look at it from an objective point of view, those good old days never existed.
Right. They're so much different than what we actually thought. In fact, I remember seeing this in the story of someone else, this one individual. He was very successful in one town, very successful, but then things started going awry. And I'm going to be very vague about the details, but things started going awry. Things weren't going as well. At one point in time, every year, the organization he was leading was on the growth edge and then started declining. Well, as it started declining, he was still healthy, still things going on, still so much to celebrate. All he could see about was, why am I still not growing? So at that point in his time, he started thinking, I got to get elsewhere. So he chased a place that he had success before, moved across America to a different place and built something there. It wasn't as successful as it was years before. So he went back to that town and recreated something there, trying to have success. So as I've watched this individual over the last 10 plus years, he's gone from east side of the United States and then went to the west side, tried to create something successful there. That wasn't as successful, went over to the other side, tried to recreate that, and went back and tried to recreate it. And I look at him now, and I think he's finally settling in, going, okay, what I have is what I have. And hopefully he's not looking back. But I could generally tell that story about so many people in life. Yeah. That in relationships, at some point in time in your marriage, things are going well, then things don't go well. So you get out of marriage, go into a new marriage, and then you look back at that marriage. And there's so many different things like this in stages of our kids and in entrepreneurial work life and in job changes and of course in COVID. And the reality is, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, no, because what makes me, so many things are buzzing in my head. And I'm thinking, because the problem is that what comes up to me when you're saying that is that people remember how things were, but they don't remember the context of how things were.
Yeah.
So like the person that you was mentioning,
yeah.
If you think about even 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that the environment was so different, Yep. So it doesn't make any sense. And another thing that was making me think about is that you're not choosing to move forward when you're looking at the ideal whatever.
Right.
And whoever listens, people who listen to this podcast regularly know or read my magazine know I'm a rabid Star Trek fan. Okay. like ever since I first saw the original series and watched everything to do with Star Trek, and I was rewatching the Deep Space Nine episode, early episodes, which I haven't seen for actually a decade or something. And so they've got the main guy basically goes and he meets a bunch of aliens, and he's trying to explain linear time. So these aliens live in the moment, so they don't understand linear time. So he's trying to explain what it means. And they were saying to him, if you're linear, why do you exist here? And they keep flashing back to the part where his wife had died. And like say, even though it happened ages ago, his brain, his body was always stuck in that time. So they were saying, if you're linear, why do you still exist here? And that is what made me think when you was doing this, is like, we are, we do, whether linear time exists or not, we perceive it in a linear way, don't we? But if we're always harking back to the good old days, whether that was when you're, I don't know, 17, being the football star, or whether, you were the youngest manager in your industry, you're never going to get anywhere else, is it? You're always going to be stuck there. So I really admire your parents to go, you know what? The money's good. It's kind of fun, but you know what? It's not a way to raise children. What happens if we get arrested and there's no one, the kids will go to care, or what happens, and I think it takes a lot of bravery to do that.
My wife and I were looking at some decisions of where to live, as we now are raising a family, right? We have one child and we have another on the way. So that's exciting. And as we're looking at that kind of question comes up. For me, the idea of, let's chase some excitement. Let's go here. Let's do that. But is that best for what is for my kids? And really ultimately putting myself in a spot where my dad and my mom were. Yeah. And really the choices that we make not only make us, but they make the people that we influence. And our choices are not made in a vacuum. So the choices that we make have a impact on so many people's lives. So often what we do is we make a choice with just one person in mind, but really, we really should think through, what is this going to make for me? And not just so often our decisions are solely money-based. I'm going to make the most amount of money. But for me, if I'm going from A and then I have an opportunity to do B, but that B is going to take me away from my family, take me away from, is it worth it? Because that choice that I make might make more money, but what is that going to turn me into? And what is it going to turn my family into?
Yeah. It's the ripple effect. And I think Maverick leaders do that. When they're making their decisions, they are looking at what's the ripple effect of that decision moving forward. And does it still, even though you might intend for it to be the greater good, if you follow the ripples, does the actual greater good get done?
Right. Yeah. So I wrote this book, right? Speak with No Fear. It's got 480 reviews on Amazon. It's been incredible to see the success of it. One of the strategies I talk about on how to communicate with confidence is this whole idea that it's not about you. And a Maverick leader and a person who wants to have great influence, a person who wants to make a great impact, these leaders, they say, I'm going to make decisions that are not just about me. And they communicate that way. If you want to communicate with confidence, if you want to lead with confidence, you have to say, it's not about me. And I talk about this in the book. The way that this directly relates to taking away fear is that so often when we get in front of someone, so right now I'm in front of your audience and you're going to put that podcast out there. Well, if I'm thinking, what is your audience thinking about me? Then I get this performance anxiety. Like, oh my gosh, I gotta sound good. I gotta be good. I gotta do this and this and this. And what if they don't like me? And what if my accent doesn't come across well? And what if I whatever. And our mind is so plagued. And that's what a lot of leaders get. They get stuck in this paralysis of analysis and just, what should I do? I don't know. What will people think if I don't do this?
I love talking to you because you just trigger me in a nice way. And because it was made me think when I was doing some leadership training somewhere, and I was saying that the biggest problems when leaders have to give feedback that isn't positive, it's done so poorly because the leader is thinking about themselves. They're not thinking about how it's going to be received. What's the impact? They're thinking, oh, I hate doing this. I feel really bad. I just need to get over and done with really quickly. So they end up going into a room and say, Mike, you're rubbish. Sort yourself out or we're going to sack you. And then going, they're not really, and then they leave the room going, oh, at least that was done. But, they're not really thinking about, if you actually want behavioural change, you need to do certain things in certain ways.
Right. Absolutely. And it's so important for Maverick to be thinking, how do my words end up serving the other person? See, if I go in thinking it's about me and what do people think about me, then I'm nervous, I'm anxious. If I go in and I think, how can I serve? Well, it doesn't matter if I look like a fool. It doesn't matter if I'm silly. It doesn't matter if I do whatever. If I'm able to help, then it's good. One of the things I do when I pick up my son from car line in kindergarten is I wait for him right there and I put on some music. And every single day when I do that, I dance in the car. And I'm sure people are thinking,
I'd love to see that.
And I'm not a great dancer, but it's not about me. If I look around and I'm thinking, what do parents are thinking about me? I'm going to get embarrassed. I'll turn red. But if my son thinks it's funny and I started turning on the car just so he could find the car in the midst of all the line, and I just turned it into this game. And he always has this smile on his face and he dances and some other kids start dancing. What's funny is when I start thinking, it's not about me, it's about him, that he gets joy out of it. He gets helped from it. Others get entertained by it. But if I think it's about me, it's going to shut me up. It's going to stop me. So instead of thinking about us and how this looks for us and how it portrays us, we turn it around and start thinking, what can I do for them?
What's interesting is as you can imagine, I do various clubs and stuff for Maverick leaders. And one of the things about Maverick leaders is that they're highly influential and they're inspirational. But I've yet to meet a Maverick leader that will comfortably hold the tag of inspiration. And I know it makes me not uncomfortable, but it makes me disbelieving for myself. People go, "You're so inspirational." I'm like, not really, no. And then I was talking to somebody, I think on one of the podcasts, and I got to the reflection that because you're not thinking of you, you're putting everything in the other person. That it's inspiring to hear because you're giving them everything, but you as the individual, it's just normal. So it seems like if someone says that, it feels like you're trying to perform for that person. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm kind of in my head, I see like those, typically American speakers on the stage, high-end music, jumping up and down, and you're like, oh, I don't find that inspirational. I don't find that motivational. I just find something. Or maybe it's just because I'm a Brit. I don't know. I just find it irritating. So, because when people say that, you think, "Oh, you're saying I'm like him." No, I'm not like him, and it's not what they're saying. So it's almost like you have to kind of step back and just accept it because you're kind of dishonoring the other person when you disagree with them.
Right. Yeah, I think again and again, if we go back to these choices that make us. How do we make these choices that make us? How do we make these choices to inspire? How do we make these choices to motivate? How do we make these choices to influence? How do we make these choices to impact? Again and again, if it goes back to, well, okay, how? I got to make decisions where it's not about me. I got to make, my parents made that decision. It's not about us. It's not about what we want. It's not about the adventure. It's about us raising our kids in a place where they can have a great life. And then even going to Mexico. Okay, our kids are going to be well protected. Our kids are going to be safe. Our kids are going to have a good life there. Let's go teach them that it's not about them. Because then at that point in time, we had this nice, comfortable life. And now we got uprooted. At the time, I thought that was just tragic. And now I wouldn't change it. And we got uprooted and learned that life wasn't about us. That there's a lot of people out there in a whole nother way that we could devote our lives to serving. I mean, even coming back to the United States, there was a decision there that I was making where it was not about me. What would have been best for me was to stay. And so over and over again, going through it's not about me. How can I make that decision? And one of the things that anchors me in the current reality, instead of going back into living in a past fictional reality, is where I go, well, I made some decisions. And right now I'm making decisions to serve my family. I'm making decisions to help others. And although there are some things I've given up by making choices, I'm gaining because I'm able to serve my family. I'm able to give them what they want. I'm able to help them. So even if you're listening right now going, how do I make those decisions Think about the people around you and the people that you want to impact and the people you want to leave a legacy to and the people that you want to transform that market and the people that you want to impact with the product that you want to sell and the people that you want to hire on. And think about how can you best benefit them?
Yeah, so what comes up for me now is like, how does someone live with the poor choices that they've made?
Yeah, I think that's a hard one, right? I look at my own life and think about different decisions and different key decisions I've made. And there's been some poor ones along the way. I mean, maybe one bad decision all my life. No, there's been several bad decisions. At times where I treated somebody this way, sometimes where I rushed something, sometimes when I didn't listen. And so when I look back in my own life and do that, I have to grieve what that poor choice caused me to lose. And so as you see, a lot of people move on with unresolved grief. Now, you talked about Star Trek. Well, my wife and I are really into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And so we just finished WandaVision. Did you see WandaVision, Judith?
No, I don't think I did.
Oh, my goodness. You better watch it. This is the most downloaded, watched show in going on right now when it was happening.
Is it on Netflix? That's what I need to know.
No, it's on Disney Plus.
Oh, I've got that. All right, I'm watching it.
Yep. Yeah, it's fantastic, and it was really fun because it was a weekly deal, and people were just like, "What's going to happen?" But it was very interesting. The whole story, in some ways, I won't ruin it for you or your listeners, is that there's someone in grief, and here's what happens out of grief. And one person's grief affects so many people. But it wasn't just grief. It was this unresolved grief. It was grief built up over many periods of time in their life, this grief over grief. And a lot of people, they make these bad decisions and it affects them. Something happens. They lose a job. Whatever happens, right? They lose a relationship. They lose out on something and they move on without grieving that bad decision caused something to die. It caused a dream to die. It caused a relationship to die. It caused this thing to happen. It caused an investment. It caused whatever it would be. And it's so important to take time and grieve when we lose something. I lost my mom in a car accident about 15 years ago, and I took time to grieve. And in fact, in many ways, I was the only family member who took time to grieve in that moment. As a result, I was able to move on actually quicker than everybody else because I thoroughly, fully grieved and embraced it, thought about it, talked about it, cried over it, wrote about it, all of that. And then I was able to move on, still with that sense of loss, but I was able to accept it. And a lot of people, they just move past the grief of the bad decision. It caused something to lose, and they move on, and they find themselves looking back and reliving it again and again and again. But that past is dead. And just like you have to mourn the death of something loved, if your bad choice caused something to die, then it's right for you to throw a funeral, to do what you need to do so that you can grieve the past and move on to your future.
You know what? So you just make me think about so many. I should just talk to you, and then I can then just write my book afterwards. Because I've just made me think. Just writing this down so I don't lose the thought. The thing. So what made me think there is that Maverick leaders are more effective because they mourn losses, and then they move on. So for other people, it feels like for other people who are observing, it feels like it hasn't really that affected them, or they're just too pragmatic. Whereas the Maverick leader is very pragmatic about it. It's like, oh man, so like this is what happened. But they'll go back and they'll reflect on it. They'll work it, So because the emotion gets dealt with, then they can then move into the analysis and move on. And then they're almost, for other people, blasé about it because they know it's been put to bed properly, so they don't have to keep revisiting it. And so I think that's probably a cautionary tale for Maverick leaders in the sense that not many people do that. So it's really frustrating when someone keeps going on and on and on about something that's happened in the past. It's like, you can't do nothing now, just move on, man. And it's just like, but because not everyone has that way of going, okay, I'm going to spend a day or a year, whatever period of time, just learning to live with this, and then I can move on. Whereas people kind of just like almost take it out of a box at 10 minutes at a time, and so it just goes on. It's like you have to lance it, don't you? Lance the boil, get it all out, and then just move on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I keep on going back to that book, Speak With No Fear, because there's so many. I think one of the reasons why it has 480 reviews is that it's not just about public speaking. People have said this is not just about public speaking, it's about life. The first strategy in the book to overcome the fear of public speaking is to uncover and clean the wound. And a lot of people have a public speaking wound. And I'd say from my own work with communicators that about 60% of people who have this fear of public speaking have a wound that they have not cleaned. And so in the book, I use a story of, as a kid, I would ride my bike and I would gash myself, and then I would go hide my wound from my mom. Well, after a little while, I'd be touching it because it would be hurting. And she would say, "What's going on? I see blood on your jeans." And she would pull up my pant leg and I'd have this big gash on my leg. And she said, "Mike, what happened?" And I would tell her, and she goes, "We got to go clean this." And then we get the alcohol, right? And it would be painful for her to uncover and then clean it out. And I didn't want the pain. So that's why I would hide it from her, because I knew she would just put the rubbing alcohol on it. But she would rub it out. She would clean it out. She'd put the Neosporin on. She'd blow it. She'd put on the little Band-Aid or whatever it might be, or the huge Band-Aid that'd be. And then I'd be able to get better because she uncovered and painfully cleaned the wound. But the alternative is worse. The alternative is just letting it fester, letting the infection get in, letting that infection grow and really turn the surrounding tissue into painful tissue. And I think a lot of people have wounds in their life, wounds from the past, wounds from bad choices, that it's not been uncovered. It's not been cleaned. It continues to grow. It continues to fester. It impacts their negative attitude. It impacts their mindset. It impacts their workflow. It impacts so many areas of life. And what they desperately need is to go uncover that failure, uncover that bad choice, uncover that hiccup, uncover that grief, uncover that story of what they were trying to do, uncover it, clean it out so they can move on. I think of the Colonel Sanders stories of how many times did he fail until he had success. And it wasn't until his 60s that he found success. My guess is he was the type of person who cleaned out the wound fairly quick, because an entrepreneurial with so many failures that eventually leads to success can't keep moving on if they keep building up and festering.
Yeah, I'm loving it. I seem to recall when you was talking, you said, "I'm going to stop there to answer your question." So that suggests to me there's more.
There is more to everything. And so I can go more in any direction that you want. Ultimately, for me, the going back to my story part, though, I moved back to the United States, and then I had this big decision. My initial big decision from that point in time, the choice was, is it money or impact? And at that point in time, I really thought it was one or the other. So I went into nonprofit work so I could make an impact. And I thought that's where I could really make a huge wave in others. And so I gave up money to make an impact. I gave up a great salary in law, which is the direction I was heading. And I went towards a nonprofit one, which for many years I didn't make very much at all. And yet I was able to make a great impact. And then years later, as I made that decision, I realized those two were not mutually exclusive. That now in the work that I do, that I can make a great income and I can have great impact, and that the two are not mutually exclusive. But ultimately, what we got to be thinking about is, what are we making these choices around? So for me, I made a life mission statement that helps me organize the choices that I make. Okay, here's my life mission. And ultimately for me, I want to help other people realize their potential, starting with my family. And so when I look at that helps me really figure out, how do I want to live my life? How do I want to do this? What kind of choices am I going to make? And then I have some values, and my values help me to make those choices narrow down. I'm not going to be the type of person working 70 hours a week. I've done that before, and I'm not doing it again. And partly because my value is to have that time with my family, to be very present in my kid's life. So when you're looking at your choices, a couple different thoughts for you. Think through your mission. What are you about? Think through your values. What do you hold dear? Because this is going to help you steer your vision, your choices. Your mission is going to help you make it. The vision, the values is going to help you steer it. And then what do you want to leave behind? And that ultimately helps you decide when and where to do your choices. And all of those come around to really help you make the type of choices that make you, that you look back and have less regrets than you would otherwise.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So when did your parents tell you, or how old, I meant to ask you, how old were you when your parents said, listen now, Mike, before you do this thing, let me tell you what we did?
Yeah, that's great. So I was around 15 years old and I was starting to just hang out with a little bit of the wrong crowd. Nothing dramatic. It wasn't like we were smuggling drugs or anything like that. But it was not the best crowd that I could be hanging out with. And so my dad was getting nervous, and instead of him talking to me, he did what several people do is, I'm not going to explain to you why, I'm just going to tell you what not to do, and I'm going to tell you even harder. So I got in a lot of trouble. I got grounded for 3 months at one point in time. And he was just saying, you're not going to go down the wrong path, and you're heavy-fisted. My mom did a different approach, and she said, Mike, let's sit down. I think it's time for you to understand our story. And part of the reason why your dad is so firm on this and in many ways controlling on what you're doing as a young person is that when he was young, he had no boundaries at all, and he didn't feel loved. And so now he wants to have lots of boundaries for you, not only so you can go in a different path than him. When he was my age at that time, he was cooking dinners for Hell's Kitchen, Hell's Angels in California at a camp. And so he, at my age of a teenager, was in a total different path, and he didn't want me to go anywhere near it. And so he heavy-handedly tried to control it. My mom instead said, here's what's going on. Here's why your dad's making this choice. Here's why he is concerned for you. And here's why he wants to make this is actually him saying, I love you. It's very interesting for me to see and hear their story from that point of view and go, oh. And it wasn't this massive like, oh, okay. But it was a sense of, now I get what's going on behind the scenes. Now I can make my own choices in that regard. I err on the side of tell people more than they need to know, because people are smart, and people, if you don't tell them what's going on behind the scenes, it's just in general leadership, then they're going to guess, and they're going to draw conclusions as to why you're not telling them. So as a leader and as an executive coach that works with CEOs, I often tell people, what is it that your staff needs to know that they're probably wondering about if you don't tell them?
Brilliant. That sounds, you know what? That's the sort of best way to deal with things, isn't it? By telling a story and people can see the authentic truth about it. But it's also a bit like somebody, I remember seeing somewhere where someone had, taken drugs or something when they were younger, and someone had asked them, if your child was to take drugs, what would you say to them to make them stop? And their response really surprised me, because this is from somebody who's a good parent and everything, said, I wouldn't want them to take drugs, but I don't feel I have the right not to say it. And I'm like, you don't have the right to say, this is what I went through, this is why it's not a good idea. Why would, it just made me surprised. Yeah. It's like there's those choices and consequences, and it's like, if you know it's not a good idea from personal experience, why would you let somebody that you love go through the exact same thing?
Right. Yeah, it's interesting.
It doesn't make any sense to me.
No, it doesn't make sense to me either. I think at least see, a lot of people, instead of making that decision for their kids, they think, well, who am I to say? Because that'd be hypocritical for me to tell them to not do something that I did. I'm thinking, I'd rather you help me than care about your own hypocrisy on this. And it's not,
I'm sure the child it's like you, isn't it? You would have that response for you was better than if you was in jail and your dad went, I avoided jail. I wish I said something to you. And you would have gone, why didn't you tell me I was going to get caught?
Yeah, and I was even, and the funny thing is, I was so benign as to what I was doing at that age. But I think for him, all these things start benign, and so I think he just projected ahead his own youth onto me, and didn't want me to even get close to the line. He had gotten far off the road. He didn't even want me to get close to the edge of the road.
He didn't even want you to go anywhere near the road.
Yeah.
He wanted you to stay far away.
Yeah, exactly. And I appreciate the heart behind it, but if my mom had not told me why he had that heart, I think my resentment would have only grown. Why is my dad being so harsh on this area? Why is he, for example, not wanting me to stay out past this time? Why is he not wanting me to go out with my friends? And why does he always want to know where I am? And this is before pagers, right? This is before cell phones.
Yeah.
And why does he have to be so controlling on all of this? And the issue was because at that age, my dad was doing far beyond what I could even have fathomed to do.
You know what makes me think? Because one of the things I say to people, you have that situation where somebody says something, or you hear someone has said something, and then you think, oh, I can't stand this. And I'm always saying, before you're quick to judge, because obviously this is second-hand, third-hand stuff, you need to consider the nature of the person. Mm-hmm. So, you hear this about the person. What's the evidence of this? What's the nature of the person that's being spoken to about? And, and then I think it makes it easier to determine where the truth would lie. Because, if someone said something to you about your dad when he's moved into that kind of conservative Christian state and said he's now selling drugs, you'd be like, but that's not the nature of my father. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Right.
Even if you knew in the past he had done that, you'd be looking right now and goes, there's no evidence. I have no evidence of this because this is not his nature. And I think now, especially with the, internet, social media and all that kind of stuff, people aren't asking, is this the nature of the person that I know? They're like, oh yeah, I read that in the paper, or I saw this, and come to some strange conclusions.
Right. Yeah, it was very interesting to hear that about someone that right? Because it is, it still is flabbergasting to me at times because I don't know him as that person. And I don't know him as making those choices. But he has since remarried since my mom passed away, and he has been very open to her about different things. So it's been interesting to hear. It's been interesting to hear her take on some of this and hearing it from a third person.
Yeah.
Who was not there.
Yeah, I guess if you're there as well, you would say it's not nature of my dad to do it today. Mm-hmm. But I can imagine him doing it before, because you would still see an indication of that kind of thought process. It might be shown in something else, but you might say, oh yeah, he's a bit of a risk taker. I could imagine he might have done that in the past.
Yeah. I think when now who he is now, and he's 72 now, and he's extremely active. He started a law practice again when he was 65.
Your dad sounds like quite the Maverick, doesn't he? Who starts a new law at 65?
Oh yeah, and he's got like a staff of 6 or something, and he's doing stuff around the country, and it's pretty crazy. He's got some really big ones, and he wrote a novel that's coming out this spring. So he's got some, and he skis and scuba dives, and
oh my gosh, he must be really fit too.
Yeah, he's more fit than I am, and I'm decently fit. And he skis with his young 20-something grandkids and my sister's kids, and he has a boat and stuff. So I was to say awesome. That he flies his planes down to Tucson from Seattle. All this to say that now it's like, oh yeah, it doesn't really surprise me that my adventurous dad was adventurous, and he just had a different way of doing it back then.
Well, I think you're a testament to him. Before we end then, is there one thing that you might want to add to the conversation?
I would say that look at the greatest challenge that's going on in your life and for me, the reason why I say this, because so many people, they've just put up with it. They've just endured this discomfort of public speaking. With so many people that I work with, it's in this communication space, and they've just put up with it. They're a 45-year-old successful person in a professional top level, and they've just put up with this fear. They've put up with something for so long. So finally they come to me. I said, why did you put this off? Well, I thought it'd go away. And the challenges in front of you won't go away naturally. Instead of just putting up with it, whether it's public speaking or an anxiety or discipline or whatever it might be that you're looking at, or these past choices, tackle it head on, go for it, challenge it, be a maverick in that area, pioneer through it so that you can get to the other side and celebrate the success and the freedom of having overcome that challenge. And then you'll have a win under your belt so that you can have another place.
Hey, that's perfect. That's really good. Mike, would you come back and have another conversation with me?
Yeah, absolutely, Judith. This was fun talking with you. I can't tell the story again and again, but I mean, I guess I could. Probably other areas.
I'm pretty sure that your knowledge is quite deep, so you'll be all right. That's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Great being on your show.
Thank you. Thank you once again for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast. I hope you have enjoyed listening to my conversation with Mike as much as I enjoyed having it. At the Maverick Paradox, we improve your impact and influence by enabling you to effectively strategize, innovate, and execute. To find out more, contact us at judith@maverickparadox.com. Thank you. If you are pathologically curious and would love to find out more about the Maverick Paradox, then please subscribe to this podcast on one of the popular podcast platforms. Alternatively, you could explore our resources on Mavericks at maverickparadox.com or read the Maverick Paradox magazine. We publish frequently each week. If you subscribe, you will get our monthly newsletter. And let's not forget my book, The Maverick Paradox, The Secret Power Behind Successful Leaders. For those that love a good discussion, you could apply to join our exclusive Facebook group. Finally, if you would like to work with us or are interested in the Maverick at work, check out maverickparadox.co.uk.